the heart of the vast Persian Empire, the city of Susa stood as a beacon of power and wonder. Beneath its golden domes, a young Jewish girl named Hadassah lived a life of quiet anonymity. Orphaned at a tender age, she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai, who taught her the values of their ancestors and a deep faith. Their lives were humble, dictated by the rhythms of exile, yet Mordecai's love provided a sanctuary. Hadassah grew into a woman of striking beauty and gentle spirit, unaware that she was destined to shake the foundations of the kingdom. While Hadassah lived in the shadows, the palace was engulfed in a royal crisis. King Xerxes, a ruler of immense wealth and volatile temper, held a lavish feast that lasted for months. In a moment of drunken pride, he summoned Queen Vashti to parade her beauty before his guests. Her refusal to be treated as a mere ornament was a bold act of defiance that sent shockwaves through the court. Fearing her rebellion would inspire women across the empire to challenge their husbands, the king's advisors urged a response. Vashti was banished, her crown stripped away, and a royal decree was issued to find a new queen who would respect the throne. The search for a successor transformed Hadassah's life. When the king's officers arrived to gather the most beautiful virgins for the royal harem, she was among those chosen. Mordecai, sensing the nature of the Persian court, gave her a vital instruction: conceal your heritage. To survive, she adopted the name Esther, blending into the Persian landscape. As she was led away from the only home she knew, Esther carried the heavy weight of a secret identity, trusting in the wisdom of the man who had been her father. In the harem, under Hegai the eunuch, the women underwent a year of beauty preparations with oils of myrrh and perfumes. While others focused on acquiring jewelry to impress the king, Esther remained focused and serene. Her simple faith provided a contrast to the frantic ambition of the others. Hegai was struck by her grace and gave her the best accommodations and attendance. He saw in her a regal dignity that surpassed looks, recognizing a strength that the others lacked. When Esther was finally presented to King Xerxes, her presence commanded the room. The king, who had seen the most beautiful women in the world, found himself captivated by Esther's spirit. He loved her more than all the others, finding in her a sincerity that the palace lacked. Xerxes placed the royal diadem upon her head, declaring her Queen of Persia. A great holiday was proclaimed, yet Esther remained a stranger to her own people's plight. Her true origin still locked deep within her heart. However, this peace was short-lived as Haman the Agagite was promoted by the king to the office of prime minister. Consumed by arrogance, Haman demanded that all who passed him bow in worship. But Mordecai, who sat at the king's gate, refused to bend his knee. To Mordecai, bowing to Haman was a violation of his devotion to God. This refusal ignited a genocidal fury in the heart of Haman. Rather than striking at one man, he plotted to destroy every Jew throughout the empire's provinces. Haman convinced Xerxes that a rebellious people lived among them who disregarded the king's laws. He offered a vast sum of silver to the royal treasury to seal the deal. Xerxes, trusting his advisor, gave Haman his signet ring, authorizing a decree of death. The date was chosen by casting lots known as pur. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The decree was sent to every corner of the empire. As the citizens read of their doom, the city was thrown into terror. Esther sat in her palace, the crown heavy on her head, realizing she was trapped in a world where her identity was a death sentence. The news of the decree spread like wildfire, turning the streets of Susa into a landscape of weeping. At the king's gate, where he once sat in quiet watchfulness, Mordecai now stood draped in coarse sackcloth with his head covered in ashes. His cries echoed through the stone corridors, a desperate plea for the survival of his people. Inside the palace, word reached Queen Esther of her cousin's state. Disturbed, she sent fresh garments to replace his mourning clothes, but Mordecai refused them. The time for comfort had passed. The time for a dangerous intervention had arrived. Esther dispatched Hathach, a trusted royal eunuch, to discover the cause of Mordecai's distress. What Hathach brought back was a physical testament of doom. Mordecai handed him a copy of the written decree, which commanded the annihilation of the Jews. The king's signet ring had sealed their fate. Mordecai charged Esther to go before the king to beg for mercy. However, the queen was seized by a paralyzing fear. She sent word back, reminding him of the law. Anyone who approached the king in the inner court without an invitation was to be put to death immediately, unless the king extended his golden scepter. For 30 days, Xerxes had not summoned her, and the distance felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Mordecai's response pierced through her hesitation. He warned that she should not imagine her royal title would protect her while her kindred perished. If she remained silent, deliverance would arise for the Jews from another place, but she and her father's house would be lost. The survival of a whole race rested on her answer. Then, he spoke the words that would define her life. Perhaps she had come to the kingdom for such a time as this. This was no longer a story about a girl who won a crown. It was about a woman appointed by Providence to stand in the gap. The weight of destiny settled upon Esther's shoulders, replacing fear with resolute courage. She no longer saw herself as a victim of palace intrigue, but as a defender of a nation. She sent a final command to Mordecai. Gather all the Jews in Susa and fast for 3 days and nights. The city fell silent as the Jewish people began their fast. She and her maidens would do the same, seeking strength beyond their own. This was a spiritual preparation before facing the most powerful man on earth. Her closing words echoed with finality. If I perish, I perish. On the 3rd day, Esther rose and donned her most magnificent royal robes, the silk and gold shimmering under the palace lights. Every step toward the inner court was a testament to her growing faith. As she crossed the threshold into the forbidden zone, the air seemed to thicken. She stood before the throne, her heart beating against her ribs. There sat King Xerxes, a ruler whose whim could end her life. When his eyes finally met hers, the silence was deafening, but instead of anger, the king felt a sudden wave of favor. He extended the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched the tip, mercy triumphing over the law. Xerxes, sensing her urgency, offered her up to half his kingdom. Yet Esther chose a strategic path of mystery. She did not reveal the plot immediately. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a private banquet. At the feast, as the wine flowed, the king asked again for her request. The king's curiosity grew with every passing moment. Still, Esther held her peace, inviting them to a second banquet the following day. This delay was born of a keen understanding of timing and influence. Haman left the palace that evening boasting to his wife Zeresh about his unique honor as the queen's guest. But his joy vanished when he passed the gate and saw Mordecai, who still refused to bow. Consumed by rage, Haman followed his wife's suggestion to build a massive 75-foot gallows. The wooden structure loomed over the city like a shadow of death. He intended to ask for Mordecai's execution the next morning. As the hammers rang out in the night, the stage was set for a confrontation that would decide a nation's fate. That night, sleep fled from King Xerxes. To pass the quiet hours, he ordered the royal chronicles to be read to him, the heavy scrolls detailing the trials of his reign. By divine providence, the scribe turned to the account of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 palace guards who had plotted to assassinate the king. The record stated clearly that Mordecai had discovered the conspiracy and saved the monarch's life. Xerxes sat upright in his bed, struck by a sudden realization. He asked what honor or distinction had been bestowed upon Mordecai for this act of loyalty. The servants replied that nothing had been done. It was Haman arriving early with a heart full of malice, ready to ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai on the 75-foot gallows he had just completed. Before Haman could utter a word about his dark request, Xerxes summoned him. The king asked, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman, blinded by his own narcissism, assumed the king was referring to him. With a chest puffed out in pride, he suggested the man be dressed in the king's own royal robes, placed upon the king's own horse, and led through the city square by the highest noble. The king's next words felt like a physical blow to Haman's soul. Xerxes commanded him to go at once and do exactly as he had described for Mordecai the Jew. The hunter had become the servant. Haman was forced to lead his enemy through the streets of Susa, while his own heart withered in shame and humiliation. Afterward, he hurried home, only to be whisked away by the royal eunuchs to the queen's second banquet. The atmosphere in the banquet hall was thick with unspoken tension. Xerxes looked at Esther and repeated his promise. "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you." This time the queen did not hesitate. Her voice shook with emotion but carried the weight of a nation. She pleaded not for gold, but for her very life and the lives of her people. She revealed that they had been sold to be destroyed and annihilated. The king demanded to know who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing. Esther pointed her finger directly at the man sitting beside them. "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman," she declared. The prime minister's face turned ashen. The wine in his cup suddenly tasted like gall. The king rose in a towering fury and stormed into the palace garden, leaving Haman to beg the queen for his life. In his desperation, Haman fell upon the couch where Esther was reclining, just as the king returned. To the king's eyes, it appeared Haman was assaulting the queen in his own house. The sentence was immediate. One of the eunuchs mentioned the massive gallows Haman had built for Mordecai, the man who had saved the king. Xerxes roared the command, "Hang him on it." Haman was executed on the very wood he had intended for the innocent. Yet, the crisis was not over. The decree Haman had signed could not be revoked according to Persian law. Esther fell at the king's feet once more, weeping for her people who were marked for slaughter. Xerxes gave his signet ring to Mordecai and authorized him to write a new decree. This counter-law allowed the Jews throughout the provinces to assemble and defend themselves against any who would attack them. When the day arrived, the fear of the Jews fell upon everyone. Instead of a slaughter, it was a day of triumph. Supported by officials, the Jewish people defended their lives. To commemorate this reversal of fate, Esther and Mordecai established the festival of Purim. Hadassah, the orphaned girl who once hid her identity, had become the savior. Her courage proved that faithfulness can change history. Esther's name would be whispered for all future generations. Light shines brightest when the night is dark.